లేదా ఆన్లైన్ క్లాसेस ద్వారా మీ విద్యార్థులకు బోధించవచ్చు।
हम आपके शहर निजामाबाद, महबूबनगर, गद्वाल, नारायणपेट, वनपड़ती और नागर कर्नूल में भी दस्तयाब हैं। आप जानते हैं कि देश में कोविड-19 कहां से आया है। आप ये भी जानते हैं हमारे देश में सैनिकों को किसने मारा। यकीनन उस देश को, इस देश से उनकी हर वो चीज को और वो ऐप को इस देश से उखाड़ कर फेंकना है। आप और हम मिलकर कदम उठाएंगे।
అయితే ఇంకెందుకు ఆలస్యం, మీ ఆన్లైన్ డిజిటల్ క్లాసెస్ కోసం సంప్రదించవలసిన మా చిరునామా ఏఎన్ఏ న్యూస్ ఛానల్, ఓల్డ్ ఆర్టీఓ ఆఫీస్, మహబూబ్ నగర్ జిల్లా। మీరు సంప్రదించవలసిన మా ఫోన్ నెంబర్లు 9502612340।
ऑनलाइन क्लासेस is just a call away।
విద్యార్థుల భవిష్యత్తుకు బాటలు వేస్తూ మునుపెన్నడూ ఎరుగని అత్యుత్తమమైన ఫలితాలతో అద్భుతమైన విద్యా ప్రమాణాలతో ముందుకు దూసుకుపోతోంది శ్రద్ధ జూనియర్ కళాశాల। మహబూబ్ నగర్ జిల్లా కేంద్రంలో ప్రముఖులు, అనుభవజ్ఞులైన చైర్మన్ జగపతిరావు ఆధ్వర్యంలో 2011లో స్థాపించబడిన మా శ్రద్ధ జూనియర్ కళాశాల ఉన్నతమైన విద్యా ప్రమాణాలతో ఇంజనీరింగ్, మెడికల్లో చక్కని ర్యాంకుల సాధనలో విజయం వైపుగా కృషి చేస్తోంది। ఇంజనీరింగ్ అయినా, మెడికల్ అయినా శ్రద్ధ జూనియర్ కళాశాల విద్యార్థులదే పై చేయి। ఇంటర్ తో పాటు ఐఐటి, నీట్, ఎంసెట్ నందు లాంగ్ టర్మ్ ప్రోగ్రామ్స్ ద్వారా కార్పొరేట్ కళాశాలలో 20 సంవత్సరాల అనుభవం కలిగిన అధ్యాపక బృందంచే ప్రత్యేక శిక్షణ తరగతులు నిర్వహిస్తూ డైలీ ప్రాక్టీస్ పేపర్స్, వీక్లీ టెస్ట్, కౌన్సిలింగ్ ద్వారా విద్యార్థుల నైపుణ్యం మెరుగుపరచడం మా ప్రత్యేకత। హ్యాండ్బాల్, ఫుట్బాల్, క్రికెట్ లో మా విద్యార్థులు జాతీయ క్రీడాకారులుగా గుర్తింపు పొందుతున్నారు। జిల్లా కేంద్రంలో సొంత భవనాలలో కళాశాలలు, విద్యార్థులకు ఉదయం, సాయంత్రం వేళలో స్టడీ అవర్స్, ఐఐటి, నీట్ లో ప్రముఖుల నిపుణులచే విద్యా బోధన, బాలికల కోసం ప్రత్యేక క్యాంపస్, ఎంపీసీ, బైపీసీ గ్రూపులతో కో ఎడ్యుకేషన్, ఎంపీసీ, బైపీసీ, ఎంఈసీ, సిఈసీ గ్రూపులతో గర్ల్స్ క్యాంపస్, ఎంపీసీ, బైపీసీ గ్రూపులతో పాటు ఐఐటి, నీట్, ఎంసెట్లతో అకాడమీ।
I am Mariam Makbul. I passed out from Shraddha Junior College in 2017 from BPC. Currently, I have passed out from Tata Institute of Social Sciences. I finished my bachelor's. So one thing which is very striking about this institute is the immense and genuine amount of effort that the team of faculty puts and takes up for the success of students and their prosperity. And another thing that is very remarkable about this place is they ignited in me the spirit of competitiveness, which is very necessary in this globally evolving market world. There was one Sanskrit slok which which I learnt when I was very young. Udyame nahi siddhyanti karyani na manorataihi nahi suptasya simhasya pravishanti mukhe mruga. This means you cannot just achieve anything just by thinking of it. You need to put in effort. That is what I have learnt from this institute. Like, even though lion is king of jungle, it has to hunt for its own prey, which is what I have learnt from Shraddha Junior College.
I am Uday Kiran. I have completed my intermediate in Shraddha Junior College in 2019 and I have joined Srinidhi Institute of Science and Technology and I scored my JEE Mains percentile as 98.19 and due to some other problems I didn't join NIT and I have scored my MCET rank as 4500 and here the lecturers take the special care with each and every student.
సీనియర్ మరియు జూనియర్ ఇంటర్ అడ్మిషన్ల కోసం సంప్రదించవలసిన మా చిరునామా శ్రద్ధ జూనియర్ కళాశాల, కో ఎడ్యుకేషన్ క్యాంపస్, మెట్టుగడ్డ। మీరు సంప్రదించవలసిన మా ఫోన్ నెంబర్ 9494430200। ప్రత్యేకమైన గర్ల్స్ క్యాంపస్ కోసం సంప్రదించవలసిన మా చిరునామా ఆపోజిట్ పంచవటి హోటల్, న్యూ టౌన్, మహబూబ్ నగర్। మా ఫోన్ నెంబర్ 7337294653। ఐఐటి, నీట్ అకాడమీ కోసం సంప్రదించవలసిన మా చిరునామా శ్రద్ధ జూనియర్ కళాశాల, మెట్టుగడ్డ। మా ఫోన్ నెంబర్ 9491629962। మీ స్కూల్స్ మరియు కాలేజ్ విద్యార్థుల కోసం ఆన్లైన్ డిజిటల్ క్లాसेस ద్వారా బోధించాలనుకుంటున్నారా?
क्या आप आपके कॉलेजेस, स्कूल्स और ट्यूशंस को डिजिटलाइज करना चाह रहे हैं?
మీ విద్యార్థుల కోసం సరైన ప్లాట్‌ఫామ్ వెతుకుతున్నారా?
क्या आप ऑनलाइन क्लासेस के लिए किसी बेहतर प्लेटफॉर्म की तलाश में हैं?
అయితే మా ఏఎన్ ఛానల్ ద్వారా ఉమ్మడి మహబూబ్నగర్ జిల్లానే కాకుండా గద్వాల, వనపర్తి, నాగర్ కర్నూల్, నానపేట్, నాగర్ కర్నూలే కాకుండా నిజామాబాద్ జిల్లాలో మా ఏఎన్ఏ న్యూస్ ఛానల్ తరపున మీ డిజిటల్ ఆన్లైన్ క్లాసెస్ ద్వారా మీ విద్యార్థులకు బోధించవచ్చు.
हम आपके शहर निजामाबाद, महबूबनगर, गद्वाल, नारायणपेट, वनपर्ती और नागर करनूल में भी दस्तयाब हैं. आप जानते हैं कि देश में कोविड-19 कहां से आया है. आप ये भी जानते हैं हमारे देश में सैनिकों को किसने मारा. यकीनन उस देश को, इस देश से उनकी हर वो चीज को और वो ऐप को इस देश से उखाड़ कर फेंकना है. आप और हम मिलकर कदम उठाएंगे.
అయితే ఇంకెందుకు ఆలస్యం, మీ ఆన్లైన్ డిజిటల్ క్లాసెస్ కోసం సంప్రదించవలసిన మా చిరునామా ఏఎన్ఏ న్యూస్ ఛానల్, ఓల్డ్ ఆర్టీఓ ఆఫీస్, మహబూబ్ నగర్ జిల్లా. మీరు సంప్రదించవలసిన మా ఫోన్ నెంబర్లు 9502612340.
Online classes is just a call away.
విద్యార్థుల భవిష్యత్తుకు బాటలు వేస్తూ మునుపెన్నడూ ఎరుగని అత్యుత్తమమైన ఫలితాలతో అద్భుతమైన విద్యా ప్రమాణాలతో ముందుకు దూసుకుపోతోంది శ్రద్ధ జూనియర్ కళాశాల. మహబూబ్నగర్ జిల్లా కేంద్రంలో ప్రముఖులు, అనుభవజ్ఞులైన చైర్మన్ జగపతిరావు ఆధ్వర్యంలో 2011లో స్థాపించబడిన మా శ్రద్ధ జూనియర్ కళాశాల ఉన్నతమైన విద్యా ప్రమాణాలతో ఇంజనీరింగ్, మెడికల్లో చక్కని ర్యాంకుల సాధనలో విజయం వైపుగా కృషి చేస్తోంది. ఇంజనీరింగ్ అయినా, మెడికల్ అయినా శ్రద్ధ జూనియర్ కళాశాల విద్యార్థులదే పై చేయి. ఇంటర్ తో పాటు ఐఐటి, నీట్, ఎంసెట్ నందు లాంగ్ టర్మ్ ప్రోగ్రామ్స్ ద్వారా కార్పొరేట్ కళాశాలలో 20 సంవత్సరాల అనుభవం కలిగిన అధ్యాపక బృందంచే ప్రత్యేక శిక్షణ తరగతులు నిర్వహిస్తూ డైలీ ప్రాక్టీస్ పేపర్స్, వీక్లీ టెస్ట్, కౌన్సిలింగ్ ద్వారా విద్యార్థుల నైపుణ్యం మెరుగుపరచడం మా ప్రత్యేకత. హ్యాండ్బాల్, ఫుట్బాల్, క్రికెట్ లో మా విద్యార్థులు జాతీయ క్రీడాకారులుగా గుర్తింపు పొందుతున్నారు. జిల్లా కేంద్రంలో సొంత భవనాలలో కళాశాలలు, విద్యార్థులకు ఉదయం, సాయంత్రం వేళలో స్టడీ అవర్స్, ఐఐటి, నీట్ లో ప్రముఖుల నిపుణులచే విద్యా బోధన, బాలికల కోసం ప్రత్యేక క్యాంపస్, ఎంపీసీ, బైపీసీ గ్రూప్లతో కో ఎడ్యుకేషన్, ఎంపీసీ, బైపీసీ, ఎంఈసీ, సిఈసీ గ్రూప్లతో గర్ల్స్ క్యాంపస్, ఎంపీసీ, బైపీసీ గ్రూప్లతో పాటు ఐఐటి, నీట్, ఎంసెట్లతో అకాడమీ.
I am Maryam Makbul. I passed out from Shraddha Junior College in 2017 from BPC. Currently, I have passed out from Tata Institute of Social Sciences. I finished my bachelor's. So one thing which is very striking about this institute is the immense and genuine amount of effort that the team of faculty puts and takes up for the success of students and their prosperity. And another thing that is very remarkable about this place is they ignited in me the spirit of competitiveness, which is very necessary in this globally evolving market world. There was one Sanskrit slok which which I learnt when I was very young. Udhyame nahi siddhyanti karyani na manorataihi nahi suptasya simhasya pravishanti mukhe mruga. This means you cannot just achieve anything just by thinking of it. You need to put in effort. That is what I have learnt from this institute. Like, even though lion is king of jungle, it has to hunt for its own prey, which is what I have learnt from Shraddha Junior College.
I am Uday Kiran. I have completed my intermediate in Shraddha Junior College in 2019.
Good morning to everybody. You are welcome to online class Botany first year. In last class we discussed about biomolecules partly. So in last class we discussed about that amino acids. So what is amino acids? What are amino acids? Amino acids are organic compounds having the amino group, carboxyl group on common carbon, that is alpha carbon, hence these are called alpha amino acids. 4 substituents are occupy the 4 valency of carbon, so that is amino group, carboxyl group, hydrogen, and 4th one is R, a functional group. Based on the type of R functional groups, amino acids are of 21 types. 21 types. So if R is represent at hydrogen, instead of hydrogen, that is a glycine. It is represented the methane, alanine. It represented the hydroxymethane, serine. So thus the OR depends on the OR functional group. The amino acids are of 21 types, which are involved in proteinaceous protein synthesis. Protein synthesis. So the physical and chemical properties of amino acids depends on the number of carboxyl group and amino group. Hence, the amino acids shows basic, acidic and neutral. So like that, the aromatic amino acids also there. Phenylalanine, tryptophan. So at solution pH, the amino acids are changed their structure. So it shows zwitterionic form. It shows zwitterionic form. That is the NH2 C double bond, NH3 C COO H and R. This is the zwitterionic form. NH3 C COO carboxyl group, hydrogen ion. This is the amino acids we discussed. So in this two questions, expected two marks questions, write the zwitterionic. What is zwitterionic form of amino acids at particular solution pH? The amino acids are changed their structure. Then on what basis the amino acids are 21 types, and write that names if or represent H, methane and hydroxymethane. Next we discussed about that lipids. Lipids also water insoluble organic compounds. Water insoluble organic. Lipids are nothing but fatty acids. Fatty acids and glycerol. Fatty acids and glycerol. So the fatty acids in which the methane bind with the carboxyl. The methane is bind with the carboxyl group. The number of carbons are vary, that is 1 to 19. 1 to 19. For example, the palmitic acid which having the 16 carbons including carboxyl. Arseninic acid which having that 20 carbons including carboxyl. Thus the number of carbon carbons are vary in fatty acids which are bind with the carboxyl group. The glycerol is the best example, that is the trihydroxymethane glycerol. So the lipids are of lipids are of saturated and unsaturated, which having the double bond, unsaturated having the single bond. Saturated lipids and unsaturated lipids are there. Unsaturated lipids are there. The fatty acids are of two types, having the two types, oils and fats. So depending on the melting point at room temperature. So the fats which are remains oily at room temperature, they are called oils. Having the solid state, that is the fats. So some of the lipids having the phosphorus or phosphorylated compounds, then it is called phospholipids. Phospholipids. So the lipids having the phosphorus or phosphorylated compounds, then it is called phospholipids. The cell membrane is made up with the phospholipids. The cell membrane is made up with the cell membrane made up with the phospholipids. Example, phospholipid example, lecithin. Lecithin is a example of phospholipid. Lecithin is the example of one of the phospholipid, lecithin, which is example of phospholipids. So in the same time, in last class we discussed about that the heterocyclic carbon compounds. Heterocyclic carbon compounds. Best example is nitrogen bases. Nitrogen bases. So these are of 4 types. Nitrogen bases of 4 types. So that is adenine. Second one, guanine, cytosine, thymidine, and uracil. These are the 5 types of nitrogen bases. Here, the 5 types of nitrogen. If any nitrogen base bind with the sugar molecule, a sugar molecule which is bound with the nitrogen base, that is called nucleoside. Called nucleoside. So a sugar radical bind with the nitrogen base, then it is called nucleoside. So adenosine, guanosine, cytosine, and thymidine, thymidosine, and uracilidine. So these are the nucleosides. When a sugar molecule bind on other hand with esterified phosphate, then it is called a nucleotide. So what is the difference between nucleoside? Only sugar molecule bind with the sugars, nitrogen base, that is a nucleoside. A sugar molecule on other hand bind with the esterified phosphate, then nucleotide. 1, 2, 3. 3 are there, then nucleotide. So adenoic acid, guanolic acid, cytosinic acid, then thymidinic acid, and uracilinic acid, then it is a acid form is nucleotide. So adenosine, it is a nucleoside. So it is important. So differentiate the nucleoside and nucleotide. So 2 mark question, define the nucleoside. And nucleoside, a sugar which bind with the nitrogen base, only nitrogen base, that is the nucleoside. A sugar on other hand which bind esterified phosphate along with nitrogen base. Sugar bind with the esterified phosphate, then nucleotide. So same time we discussed about metabolites. So during the metabolic process, so many organic compounds are formed with the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, like that. So these are known as biomolecules or metabolites. Biomolecules are nothing but metabolites. So metabolites are, depending on its function, or use of the metabolites to the plant. The metabolites are of 2 types, that is primary metabolites, secondary metabolites. Primary metabolites, secondary. So primary metabolites which having the identifiable function. The primary metabolites having the identifiable function in plants and animals. So it is own identifiable function in organism. So identifiable function in plants and animals, that is a primary. So secondary, which do not have any identifiable function to the plants. So they are the metabolites which are useful to the plants and animals. The secondary metabolites which are not useful to the plants and animals, or identifiable function in plants. So for example, so this is the primary metabolites, example starch, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids. These are useful for the plants. The products are useful for the plants. They are primary. So the secondary metabolites which do not have any identifiable functions. So that is the resin. Flavonoids, terpenoids, gums. Resins, flavonoids, terpenoids, etc. are not useful for the plant. These secondary metabolites are useful to the human being, which are not useful to the plants, but which are useful for the human being. They are called secondary. It is also important for 2-mark question. So define the primary and secondary metabolites. During the metabolic process, the organic compounds or biomolecules are produced in the living organism. They are called metabolites. The metabolites are of 2 types: primary metabolites, secondary metabolites. Primary metabolites and secondary metabolites. The primary metabolites are having the identifiable function for organism, whereas secondary metabolites which do not have any identifiable function for the plants. So for example, resin, flavonoids, terpenoids, gums, etc., which are useful, very useful for human being. So these we discussed in last class. Then today we have macromolecules. Biomacromolecules are acid insoluble biomolecules are the macromolecules. All the biomolecules, the macromolecules, the biomolecules having one common feature, that the molecular weight of biomolecules, ranges 18 to 800 daltons. A common feature for all biomolecules, that molecular weight is 18 to 800. The macromolecules includes that is polysaccharides. Proteins, nucleic acids, and lipids. So generally, the macromolecules which having the molecular weight above 1000, the biomolecules which having the which having the molecular weight above 1000, they are called macromolecules. The biomolecules which having the molecular weight, the biomolecules which having the molecular weight above 1000 daltons. The biomolecules which having the molecular weight above 1000 daltons, they are called macromolecules. Macromolecules. Whereas the lipids having the less than 800 daltons, though it is included in macromolecules, Why? So why the lipids are included macromolecules? So the cell wall, the cell membrane and membrane of the organelles. Membrane of the organelles is made of the lipids, made of the cell membrane and organelles. Membrane is made of the lipids. When we grind the cells, the cell membrane which is break into small pieces to form vesicles. So when the cells are grind, the cell membrane is break into small pieces which form into vesicles. So when it is filter, the vesicles are remain. So which is not soluble in acid. Hence the lipids are placed in, though it is a less molecular weight, these lipids are placed in the macromolecules. So the macromolecules means biomacromolecules means which are having the molecular weight above 1000 daltons, then they are considered as a macromolecules. So the macromolecules includes polysaccharides, proteins, nucleic acids, lipids. So the lipids having the molecular weight less than 1000 or 800, though it is included in macromolecules, because of the very reason is the cell membrane and membrane of the cell organelle is made up with the lipids. When the cells are grind, the cells are disturbed. The cell membrane break into small pieces which are formed into vesicles. When this is filter, the vesicles are not passed through the filter, so which is insoluble in acid. Because of that reason, the lipids are placed in the macromolecules. Next, we shall discuss about that what is proteins. So proteins are polymer of polypeptide chain. Proteins are polypeptide chain. Proteins are nothing but polypeptide chain, which is made up with the chain of amino acids. So the proteins are of polypeptide chain. So the amino acids bind with the peptide band to form a long chain. That is nothing but proteins are polypeptide chains. So proteins are essential for metabolic activities. You in further classes, in higher classes, you will learn about the proteins chain, and it's important. It is important. So it is essentiality of the proteins in biometabolism. You will learn in higher classes. So the proteins are of two types: essential proteins, non-essential proteins. Essential proteins are of two types. The essential proteins and non-essential protein. So proteins are of two types. So it is a polypeptide chain which is made of the polymer of amino acids. So the amino acids are bind with the peptide bonds. Then it is the amino acids are arranged as a building blocks in polypeptide chain. The proteins are of two types: essential proteins, non-essential proteins. So the non-essential proteins are made up by organisms itself. The non-essential proteins are made of by organisms itself. The organisms of the body itself prepare the non-essential proteins. So the essential proteins are provided through the dietary proteins. Dietary proteins are dietary food. So the essential proteins are supplied by the food or dietary proteins. The proteins are made of play a major role in the formation of the enzymes, hormones, vitamins. The proteins play an important role in metabolism, that is, act as enzymes, hormones, vitamins. So ribulose carboxylase oxidase, it is an enzyme which is essential in photosynthesis. Thus, these are the biomacromolecules. One of the biomacromolecules, proteins. Proteins are nothing but polypeptides, polymer of polypeptide chain. In polypeptides, the amino acids are bind with the peptide bond, which are act as a building blocks of protein. The protein is essential in metabolic activities. So the importance of proteins you can learn in higher classes. So the proteins are of two types: essential proteins, non-essential proteins. Essential proteins, non-essential proteins. Non-essential proteins can made in the body itself. The non-essential proteins need not to supply. So the non-essential proteins itself prepare in the living organisms. Then essential proteins are provided through the dietary food, which play an important role in metabolism. So synthesis of the organelles and cytoplasm. Then it is play important role in formation of the enzymes, hormones, vitamins. So the proteins are of primary proteins, secondary proteins, tertiary proteins, and like that. So primary proteins, which are linear amino acid polypeptide chain. So secondary proteins which fold on its back like alpha. So the tertiary proteins which are fold number of times to form a woolen ball-like structure. So thus the primary proteins are of primary proteins, secondary proteins, and tertiary proteins. Primary proteins, linear polypeptide chain. Secondary proteins which fold its on back and form into alpha-like structure. Then tertiary proteins are fold number of times to form a woolen ball-like structure. That is a tertiary protein. Next, polysaccharides. The acid insoluble pellet in the cytoplasm, the acid insoluble pellet is a polysaccharide. It is a polymer of monosaccharides. Polysaccharide is it is nothing but carbohydrates. It is the polymer of monosaccharides. Polymer of polysaccharides are a pellet, insoluble pellet is known as a polysaccharide. It is nothing but carbohydrates. The polysaccharides as polymer of monosaccharides. Polymer of mono, which is made of the number of sugar molecules. Monosaccharides. So the monosaccharides are building blocks in the polysaccharides. The sugars are building blocks in the polysaccharides. For example, cellulose is a polymeric monosaccharide. Polymeric monosaccharide, which is made up with the only one type of saccharides. So that is a homopolymer. Cellulose is a homopolymer polysaccharide. Homopolymer saccharide. So hence it is a homopolymer of polysaccharide. Homopolymer of polys. So the polysaccharides are nothing but carbohydrates which is insoluble macromolecules. It is a polysaccharide polymer of which is made of the polymer of monosaccharides. The sugars are the building blocks of polysaccharides. For example, cellulose is a polymeric monosaccharide. Hence, it is a homopolymer of polysaccharide. So the cellulose is variant. The starch is variant. The starch is variant, which is made up with the different polysaccharides. Like the glycogen is also another variant polysaccharide. The the starch is a variant of polysaccharide. Similarly, the glycogen is also variant of polysaccharides. The glycogen which is abundant in the animal cells, which is present in the plant cells. Starch is present in the starch and glycogen is variant of polysaccharides. So the starch which having the iodine, hence it shows the blue color. It indicates the blue color. Whereas glucose does not having hold the iodine, hence it does not shows any blue color. So the cellulose is an important. The paper is made up with the pulp of cellulose. The paper is made up with the pulp of cellulose. The paper is made up with the pulp of cellulose, plant cellulose. So the cell wall is made up with the animals, the plant cells. The cell wall is made up with the cellulose. So the paper is made up with the pulp of cellulose, and cell wall is also made up with the cellulose. So in polysaccharides, the right hand end is called reduced end. So the left hand is non-reduced or growing end. This is the polysaccharide. Polysaccharide is nothing but acid soluble pellet. That is the macromolecule. It is nothing but carbohydrates. The polysaccharides are polymer of monosaccharides. So the Sugars are the building blocks of polysaccharide. So for example, cellulose is a polymeric polysaccharide, which is made up with only one type of sugars, and it is a homopolymer of polysaccharide. The starch is variant polysaccharide. Similarly, the glycogen also a variant polysaccharide. So the polysaccharide, the right hand end is reduced end, and the left hand end is the growing end. So the polysaccharides which hold the starch, which hold the iodine molecule, indicates the blue color. The glycogen does not hold any iodine, hence it does not show any. Then the cellulose is an important in cell wall formation. Cell wall is formed by the cellulose, and the paper is prepared by the pulp of cellulose. So the cell wall is made up of the cellulose, whereas in arthropods and fungi, the cell wall is made up with a polysaccharide chitin. So in arthropods and fungi, the cell wall is made up with the chitin. In plants, the cell wall is made up with the cellulose. That is the polysaccharide. Next, nucleic acids. The another acid insoluble macromolecule is nucleic acid. Nucleic acid is a true macromolecule in the living organisms. The nucleic acid is nothing but polymer of nucleotides. The nucleic acid is a polymer of nucleotides. So the nucleotides which contains three parts, that is the nitrogen base, the nucleotide which is made up with the three parts, that is nitrogen base. Nitrogen bases are adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine, uracil. Nitrogen bases are adenine, guanine, thymine, cytosine, uracil. The sugar radical. Then phosphate. The nucleotide consists of three components, that is nitrogen bases, sugars and phosphates. So the sugars which are ribose sugar or deoxyribose sugar. The ribose sugars are present, that is a RNA. Deoxyribose sugars are present, that is a DNA. So the nucleic acid which has ribose sugars, that is called RNA, which has a deoxyribose sugars, that is a DNA. So the nucleic acids are true genetic material. They act as a genetic material. So this is the topic. Here we are going to conclude the topic. Next we will continue the topic day after tomorrow, the same topic. So as today we discussed about the biomacromolecules, which has one common feature, that is the biomolecules having the molecular weight 18 to 800 approximately. So the biomacromolecules includes polysaccharides, proteins, nucleic acid, lipids. The biomolecules which having the molecular weight more than 1000 daltons, they are called macromolecules. Though the lipids having the less molecular weight, it is included in macromolecules because of its acid insolubility. Okay.
మీ స్కూల్ స్కూల్స్ మరియు కాలేజ్ విద్యార్థుల కోసం ఆన్లైన్ డిజిటల్ క్లాసెస్ ద్వారా బోధించాలనుకుంటున్నారా?
क्या आप आपके कॉलेजेस, स्कूल्स और ट्यूशंस को डिजिटलाइज करना चाह रहे हैं?
మీ విద్యార్థుల కోసం సరైన ప్లాట్ఫామ్ వెతుకుతున్నారా?
क्या आप ऑनलाइन क्लासेस के लिए किसी बेहतर प्लेटफॉर्म की तलाश में हैं?
అయితే